Rafael Lopez of Center Grove Road and Ralph A. Lopez, who is Vice President. And we have Mr. Rafael's wife, Beatrice Lopez, with us for moral support. Good morning, all of you.
Good morning.
Mr. Rafael, and I call you by your first names because Lopez will become very confusing speaking to the three of you. Rafael, what made you decide to form this Puerto Rican Civic Union?
Well, the fact that we have about 700 Puerto Ricans in this area encouraged us to start an organization in this town and to help them out to bring our people to understand the problems that they face in this community.
In other words, when there are newcomers in the Dover or area as well as in Morris County, you have been able to take care of them as they enter the community and make them more accustomed to the northern way of life. It isn't necessarily to the American way of life, is it, Mr. Ralph Lopez?
No, well, we think that these people are citizens. The only thing they're not acquainted with their ways of living up here. And we will set up committees for the incoming ones, and the ones that are here right now. They have a problem, they'll come to us, we'll talk it over in the club, and we'll see what we can do with them. We'll also expect to have a school inside the club for languages, because their language barrier is terrific.
That is one of the problems that they come to you for, because of the language barrier. And I imagine housing is difficult enough for anyone in this particular area, and housing must be a terrible problem for anyone coming from outside the confines of the United States.
They find themselves kind of shy on a kind of a language barrier. They know what they want, but they can express themselves. Sometimes they want to buy something, talk to someone about a house, but they can't. So they'll come to us, we'll take care of it.
Now, you say they are American citizens. I think we ought to emphasize that particularly. They aren't coming here as immigrants by any chance.
Oh, no, they have just as right as anybody else. They, in 1898, the war, Spanish-American War. 1917, the law was passed. They became American citizens. They can come here. There's no visas, no nothing. They're just like a state.
There are no visas. And since 1917, a law was passed which made all Puerto Rican citizens American citizens, and I think that so that they don't have to come here and establish themselves and take out citizenship papers and be told that if they don't like this country that they can go back, because they are actually Americans.
Oh yes, they are. In fact, they were called upon during the war to help, just like.
May I say that we are migrants? We want to be called that.
Migrants instead of immigrants, and as you can see that there is quite a difference in Puerto Rico, and I'd like to discuss the way of life there and establish why the Puerto Rican has a little difficulty living in the north, and anything north of Florida is the north for a Puerto Rican. Why is that, Mrs. Lopez? Is it because of the climate?
Well, yes, there's quite a difference, in climate from Puerto Rico to here. The average temperature down there is about 72, and I think the average temperature here is about 40 or 30.
Well, 72 would mean that there is a constant season, and would mean that the Puerto Rican only requires one type of clothing.
Exactly.
And I imagine most Southerners are faced with that problem when they come up north. They don't have winter coats. They never had to shop for particularly warm clothing.
The only difference between the Southerners and the Puerto Ricans is that the Southerners do not have the language barrier which the Puerto Ricans have.
Well, I know that there's a very good school system that has been established in Puerto Rico. Are the children taught only Spanish?
No, they're taught English and Spanish for the ones that do go to school. It's a bilingual school system in Puerto Rico. And in fact, let me point out that we have the only bilingual university in the Americas.
So it sounds most modern down there.
Yes.
What are some of the other modern facilities, Mr. Rafael Lopez, that they have down there?
When we talk about facilities, we enjoy the same facilities that we have in the mainland. See, our markets are the same like we have in the States.
Do you mean to say they have supermarkets on a scale?
Supermarkets, we have outdoor movies, we have concerts and everything concerning to the way of life, just like the States.
it isn't as if most people picture Puerto Rico people lying around the sand, sunning themselves under a palm tree. That might be the ideal way of life, but I wouldn't say it is the life of the Puerto Rican down there, would you, Mr. Ralph
No,
Lopez?
it's that, in fact, a lot of people don't realize how close we are to the island. You can live in New York today, and you land in San Juan, and you think you're in Florida. In other words, the change is hardly any. If we only knew it, a lot of us don't. Let's say Americans over here think that you're going into a jungle, or it's not. You go into a city. When you walk into it's a big city, big movie houses, and just like over here.
And it isn't a matter of these people never
No.
having worn a pair of shoes
Oh.
or not wanting a good way of life. It's very easy for people who are established in the States to forget that many of them are products of our melting pot in America and were actually grandchildren or great-grandchildren of previous waves of other language people coming to America. I think that it took at least a generation or so for the children of that group to assimilate themselves in a way of life, and they were actually coming from a European area where the life was very dissimilar, wouldn't you say, Beatrice?
Yes, well, in a certain way, because they had climatic conditions were more or less the same, so they didn't have to worry about that. But I would say today what we face are more or less social frontiers compared to the physical frontiers that the other migrants faced before.
Well, I think that even then there were social barriers. You remember people having to defend themselves with shillelaghs because
right.
they were not accepted at first. Yet those shillelagh carrying men are amongst our foremost citizens today,
right.
and we're proud of them, and they're proud of their American heritage today. The Puerto Rican, even though he could not vote in Puerto Rico, was living under a very similar democratic form of government. Mr. Rayfield Lopez, they have their own governor that they elect at this point.
Since 1948, Puerto Rico was made a Commonwealth, and they had the right to appoint a governor, Puerto Rican governor. Prior to that, the governors were appointed by the President of the United States.
And they have a democratic form of
We
government.
have a Democrat.
The Puerto Rican, when he comes to the States, is immediately eligible to vote, except for what barrier, of course. He has to establish residence, I imagine.
Well, just like you and I.
Yes, if we were to move out of the
That's
state.
right, you're out of the state. You'll have to wait the same period as they have to wait. But they can vote.
As long as they comply with the Board of
With the
Elections regulations, then they can vote in the
Right.
following.
Register just like everybody else.
And the children today, of course, in Puerto Rico present similar teenage problems.
Same.
I understand they're interested in rock and roll.
Exactly.
And in the supermarkets and modern drugstores, I know the children get similar products.
May I point out that as you walk down the main street in San Juan, you have to know more or less both languages. You'll see signs in Spanish and English. The American way of life is very, very much at sight. I mean, it's there. It's a blend of Spanish and American way of life. But mostly American, I would say.
Now, we've come to the part where everybody will say, well, if the climate is so wonderful and Puerto Rico is growing in industry and so on, why has there been such an influx of Puerto Ricans in the United States?
I'd like to emphasize on that point. See that Puerto Rico is a very small island. In fact, it's 35 miles by 100. And we have over 2.5 million people in that island. So being that we are so crowded there, the industries in the island are not enough to absorb the majority of the working people. So they come up to the mainland because they have a better chance of working here, and they think that being that they are citizens, they come up here and they find ways and means to live up.
It would be just the same as if on the eastern seaboard today there were shutdowns of factories and a big wave of movement of businesses out to the west coast. I imagine a lot of Easterners would have to pick up their bundles and go towards the west coast.
Exactly. It's just what happens.
Populations
You're in
grow,
the
but islands don't.
That's right. The islands stay the same size, unfortunately.
I know that Puerto Rico has a very interesting tropical disease institute that has.
Oh yes, it's very famous. Yes.
I think it's the only one in the world, isn't
Yes,
that right,
yes,
Beatrice?
yes, very, very.
And they have supplied all this information to the United States,
Exactly.
all the discoveries about tropical diseases. So there is an interchange of culture, I imagine. And I'm getting so much out of this. A very interesting book that was given to me called Know Your Fellow American Citizen from Puerto Rico, which describes in great detail the life of Puerto Rico.